We like to believe we were first to stack stones with intention, first to invent tools, first to look at the world and see a shape that did not yet exist and decide to build it. In every textbook, civilization begins only 6,000 years ago. We are told that history is barely older than a few grandfathers piled on top of one another. The story begins with the first cities of Sumer, with the Nile, with kings and tablets and writing. Before that, the world is painted as empty. No culture, no architecture, no memory. But that story collapses as soon as we start to look deeper, beneath the surface of continents, and at the bottom of caves sealed for 176,000 years. Evidence appears that rewrites everything we thought we knew. Structures older than cities, rings of stone older than agriculture, tools older than our own species, a fireplace in France that once warmed a circle of huts, a cave chamber shaped by hands that were not ours, a line of megaliths that mark the path of the rising sun across desert sky. These things should not exist if the story in our textbooks were complete. The truth is simpler and far more astonishing. Humans have been building for an impossibly long time. Not just Homo Sapiens. Other humans, other species, our cousins. Homo erectus built huts nearly 500,000 years ago. Neanderthals built stone circles in deep earth darkness 176,000 years before the first pyramid. Denisovans carved sacred chambers on the roof of the world. And 3,300,000 years ago, long before any known species could speak words, someone walked across a riverbed in Africa, picked up a stone, and changed it with thought. That was the moment the world turned. Not because of the tool itself, but because of the idea. The idea that the world can be shaped. This book is not a myth hunt. It is not a search for imaginary lost golden ages or mysterious civilizations erased by ancient cataclysm. It is a scientific investigation into the builders who came before us. We follow the evidence that is real. We rely on radiocarbon dates, sediment layers, comparative anatomy, artifact analysis, and the slow, careful archaeology that takes years of patience. We challenge assumptions not with fantasy, but with data. The oldest structures were not made of stone. They were made of wood, bone, hide, and fiber. The earth does not preserve these things. Ice grinds, oceans flood, wind erodes, fire consumes. What survives is only the rare and the unlikely. The majority of the human story lies underwater, underground, or completely dissolved. Civilization did not begin when humans learned to farm. Farming began when humans learned the power of gathering. Architecture did not emerge because society needed protection. Society emerged because architecture taught us how to gather, how to plan, and how to imagine a future worth staying for. We were not the first. We were not alone. We are only the last surviving branch of a family of builders. This is the story of them, the ones before us. For most of modern history, we have believed a very simple story. Civilization began only a few thousand years ago. Human progress, we are told, begins with the cities of Sumer, resting beside slow-moving rivers that curled like ink on ancient clay tablets. The first kings, the first astronomers, the first written languages all supposedly appear around 6,000 years in the past, and the world before that point is imagined as endless emptiness, a time of wandering tribes, no architecture, no deliberate structures, no grand planning, the earth waiting silently for someone to begin history. The story sounds reasonable. It is easy to teach. It places a clear beginning to everything we find familiar. People learn that Sumer appears first, then Egypt, then the Indus Valley, then Yellow River societies. To most, this is the straight line of progress, from nomads to farmers to cities to us. Yet when you stand inside a dig site and watch what emerges from the ground, the story begins to unravel. The earth does not bend to human timelines. Sediment does not obey textbooks. Every time archaeologists remove another thin layer of compacted soil, they reveal something older than what the official story would prefer. Radiocarbon measurements do not care about what we find comfortable. Neither do optical luminescence tests on buried quartz grains, nor the microscopic study of pollen locked inside hardened mud. When the dates come back from laboratories and the numbers are in words, they often say something that both excites and disturbs. They say that building began far earlier than the first cities. They say that humans or human relatives were shaping the world long before the time assigned to civilization. For anyone who thinks scientifically, anomalies are not annoyances. They are the beginning of new knowledge, and there are anomalies everywhere. On a desolate hill in southern Anatolia, standing stones rise in perfect circles and are carved with animals and abstract symbols. Their radiocarbon age is more than 11,000 years. They were made before farming. They were made before pottery. They were made while humans were still hunting wild gazelle and gathering nuts from thorned shrubs on windswept plains. The site seems to whisper one question: who builds monuments before villages? Inside a cave deep in France, broken pieces of stalagmite were arranged into a circle. The rock shows signs of burning. The layers above it confirm the age. It is older than 170,000 years. That is not a mistake. A structure in the dark built by a species that was not us. The discovery forces a shift in thinking. The image of pre-human relatives as simple or uncreative is shattered by a ring of limestone inside a cave. If the idea of the first civilization being Sumer is correct, then everything complex must appear suddenly within just a few thousand years. Yet, archaeology repeatedly finds complexity far earlier, not only in one place but scattered across continents like hints of a deeper story. There are ancient stone circles standing in the Sahara Desert long before Egypt built its first large tombs. There are megaliths on remote highlands. There are tools older than our species. Every excavation is either a confirmation of the expected timeline or a quiet rebellion against it. The rebellion grows every year. The real world does not offer clean beginnings. There is no clear point where the past suddenly shifts from animal simplicity to architectural intent. Instead, complexity appears like a tide, slow at first, then powerful, then unstoppable. The problem is that our minds prefer sharp turning points. We prefer a definite starting line. We prefer to say civilization began here, on this riverbank, with these first kings. It allows us to insist that everything before was primitive. It allows us to feel unique. Yet the soil keeps contradicting us. Part of the confusion comes from what archaeology can easily detect. Stone structures survive. Wood rots, bone breaks, leather decays. If someone built a shelter from mammoth ribs or erected wooden pillars around a ritual hearth on a cold steppe, time would erase every trace of the material. Only intentional stone choices survive deep time. Yet humans and our relatives worked with whatever was abundant. For more than 90% of human existence, that material was wood and animal bone. If a community built a structure in a coastal region 20,000 years before the present, rising sea levels could bury that structure under 120 meters of water. The absence of evidence becomes an illusion of absence. In science, good questions matter more than convenient answers. When we remove assumptions and listen to the ground, the evidence leads to a radical conclusion. Building did not begin 6,000 years ago. Building began whenever an intelligent mind gathered material and arranged it into form. The first pillar could have been a branch placed purposely to break the wind. The first monument could have been a ring of stones around a fire. Architecture is not defined by size, but by intention. Still, there is resistance. Accepting earlier building forces us to accept that our species might not have been the first to shape space deliberately. That idea touches something deep inside our identity. Humans are uncomfortable losing the feeling of being exceptional. We prefer the neat narrative where all invention flows downward from a single point that we can label. Yet evolution does not produce breakthroughs in neat sequences. It produces them through overlapping species, exploring similar solutions over enormous stretches of time. Near the end of the 19th century, archaeologists believed that cave paintings were crude marks from thoughtless primitives. When better dating techniques revealed the incredible age and detail of these images, the narrative changed. The same pattern repeats today with permanent structures. Each time measurements push the age further back, the narrative requires adjustment. Science progresses not by defending old ideas, but by surrendering to evidence. And the evidence points toward a powerful possibility. The first builders may not have been Homo sapiens at all. To understand who might have shaped the world before us, we must explore the tree of human evolution. We are a single branch on a large and tangled root system. Other branches existed alongside us for hundreds of thousands of years. Many of them could create fire. Some crafted adhesives. Others traveled vast distances carrying memories of roots and resources. If building is the act of shaping materials according to an internal plan, then the question becomes simple. Which species had the mind for planning? Which had hands skilled enough to shape material? Which had the time and cooperation required to create something that endures? The answer pulls us out of the narrow confines of our own timeline. Civilization does not begin with writing or with pottery or with river valleys. Civilization begins with intention, and intention began long before us. At the edge of our understanding, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Our story is not the story of the first civilization. It is only the story of the civilization that survived long enough to remember. The deeper we dig into the timeline of our ancestry, the more we discover that we are not alone in the history of building. Our species, Homo sapiens, is roughly 300,000 years old. For most of that time, we lived without metal, without writing, and without permanent cities. Yet the Earth holds the traces of earlier minds. A different species, Homo erectus, walked out of Africa nearly 1,900,000 years ago. They reached lands that would one day be called Indonesia and China. They crossed distances that even modern explorers would find intimidating. These beings used fire, they shaped stone, they organized hunting strategies. If they could coordinate complex group movement across continents, why assume they could not coordinate the placement of wood or stone into a deliberate structure? When we think of ancient humans, we picture someone crouched in the dirt using primitive tools. The mind returns to this image because school taught us that progress is linear. First walking on two legs, then fire, then stone, then farming, then writing, then cities, then technology. The truth is far less tidy. Fire appears in different regions at different times. Complex tools appear, then vanish, only to reappear again in another place. Innovation is not a straight line. It is a flickering pattern, advancing and retreating like waves on a shore. To say that civilization began 6,000 years ago is to ignore an ocean of earlier complexity. Much of what early humans built is lost, not because it was never made, but because time removes certain materials from the archaeological record. Wood decays, fibers rot, bone disintegrates. Imagine an ancient camp of mammoth hunters beside a frozen river near the end of the last ice age. They erect tall wooden poles and wrap them with hide. Inside the shelter, a fire burns near a hearth cut into the ground. They might decorate the interior with carved ivory. They might arrange stones outside to mark an entrance or a path. 10,000 years later, nothing remains. The wood disappeared. The bone vanished. A glacial flood swept away the hearth. Archaeology can only recover what time allows. We do not see most of history. The coastlines of the world were once very different. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were at least 120 meters lower than today. Entire land bridges connected continents. Rivers carved paths that now lie deep beneath waves. If an early culture built structures near the shore, they are now hidden under salt water and thick sediments. We map only a fraction of the sea floor. The disappearance of coastal structures is not a theory, it is basic geology. When the climate warmed, meltwater filled the oceans. The sea moved inland. Whatever was built on ancient coastlines was simply erased without ceremony. Archaeology is not a perfect record, it is a shadow of a shadow. Still, even with these limitations, some structures remain. Their presence tells us that building is not unique to recent humans. It is a cognitive behavior shared by multiple human species. This is the idea that challenges our pride. If building is not exclusive to Homo sapiens, then what does that say about civilization? We are not the beginning. We are the continuation. Consider again the standing stones in southern Anatolia. The pillars are massive limestone blocks arranged into circles. Some are taller than a person, Many weigh more than 10 tons. The surface of the pillars carries its own language of symbols: foxes, wild boar, birds, and geometric patterns. The site, now known as Göbekli Tepe, dates to 11,600 years ago. The people who gathered there had not yet invented agriculture. They did not plant wheat, they did not build permanent villages. Yet they moved enormous stones with organization and purpose. They carved patterns with confidence into rock. They understood geometry long before they understood crops. Archaeologists once believed that farming came first and buildings followed. Göbekli Tepe reverses that logic. The evidence suggests that gathering for ritual or shared purpose could have motivated the invention of farming, not the other way around. Complex thinking did not begin with agriculture. Agriculture might have begun with complex thinking. Some researchers had difficulty accepting these findings at first. If the pillars were younger, they would fit comfortably into the traditional timeline. But the radiocarbon data is consistent, the sediment layers are consistent, the location of animal, bones and tools make sense only if the site existed long before farming. There is no way around the data without rejecting basic scientific standards. And so, our definition of civilization must stretch wider. Once we accept that complexity existed earlier than expected, an astonishing possibility emerges. What we call civilization may not be a sudden invention, it may be an inheritance. The cognitive frameworks that allow us to build cities might have roots that reach into deep evolutionary history. The first architects may have been Neanderthals planning structures inside caves. The first engineers may have been Homo erectus building shelters on windy beaches during warm interglacial seasons. The first designers may have been unknown toolmakers on the savannah more than 3 million years ago, shaping mind and hand in tandem. The ground beneath our feet holds memories older than our culture. Every shard of flint and every layer of ash is a message from someone who lived a life just as real as ours. They felt hunger, they felt cold, they dreamed, they raised children and mourned the dead. They looked at the horizon and imagined possibilities. They shaped their surroundings with purpose. To deny them the status of builders simply because their structures were lost is to confuse absence of evidence with evidence of absence. Scientific thinking requires humility. We must follow data even when it leads away from our preferred narrative. The mind that builds a shelter is not smaller or simpler because its structure did not become a city. A single deliberate act of construction is architecture. A community that coordinates shared labor is civilization. When we step back, the illusion of emptiness dissolves. The world before the first known cities was not a blank canvas. It was filled with intelligent beings experimenting with space, materials, and ideas. Our species did not awaken in a featureless world. We arrived in a world already shaped by others. If we walked backward through time, step by slow step, past the pyramids, past the earliest cities of Sumer, past the world before written language, we would eventually reach a point where the visible evidence disappears. Fields become forests, villages turn to temporary camps, then finally, even those vanish. In that silence, we might think we have reached a beginning, but we have not. We have only reached the limit of what survives. Civilization is not defined by what remains. Civilization is defined by what was done. Imagine a group of early humans living during a warm interglacial period. They choose a high ridge with a view of a valley full of migrating animals. The leader of the group, perhaps an elder with decades of memory, points to places where branches could be placed into the ground. Others gather saplings, bend them, tie them, and stretch animal skins over the frame. Inside, they place stones in a circle and build a fire at the center to warm the shelter from the evening cold. Children watch and learn. The group is safe. They have shaped the world into something new. This is building. This is architecture. If we want to understand human development honestly, we must broaden our definition beyond what survives for archaeologists to find. The very first structures would have been made from the materials most easily gathered: wood, bone, hide, river clay. A few weeks of rain, a freeze, or a shift in the riverbank would erase everything. Yet the minds that planned those structures were already capable of deliberate thought. The intention itself is proof of intelligence. Scientific humility requires that we accept what the evidence does not show. Archaeology does not reveal the past. It reveals the parts of the past that were fortunate enough to be preserved. There is one more layer to this illusion. Human memory is astonishingly short. Even in ourselves we see this. Ask someone to recall the world as it was a single century ago. Few can. Societies forget their own origins in the span of 3 or 4 generations. If entire cultures lived and died before the first cities, then only silence remains. Stone structures can last, but stories do not. Oral histories vanish when the storytellers are gone. We assume that because no story survived, nothing happened. Yet the earth is not empty. It is layered with signals. Layers of charcoal deep in cave sediments show controlled fire from hundreds of thousands of years ago. A sticky black residue tells us that Neanderthals created adhesive from birch bark by heating it without oxygen, an advanced chemical process. Stone tools predating our species by more than 2 million years appear at ancient lake beds. Sometimes the evidence comes not in the form of completed buildings, but through the wear patterns on tools. A flake sharpened at a consistent angle shows intention. A burn mark within a ring of stones shows a hearth. A set of post holes within firm sediment reveals a structure, even if the wood is gone. The ground remembers what our history books forget. Consider the 3.3 million year old stone tools from Lomekwi on the western side of Lake Turkana in Kenya. If the makers of these tools were not even members of our genus, then the roots of construction may reach further than the Homo lineage. Toolmaking requires foresight, the ability to predict how a stone will fracture, and the patience to repeat controlled movements. A mind that can shape a stone can shape a space. The implications are profound. We are not the first species to fit the world to an idea. Every new find demands the same question. If Homo erectus built temporary shelters from wood, if Neanderthals arranged stalagmites into perfect circles inside deep caves, if unknown pre-human toolmakers were shaping stones millions of years ago, why is it so difficult to imagine that they built structures? The answer is simple. We do not find those structures because nature devours everything except stone. What survives shapes our beliefs. We live in a world where cities are made of metal and concrete. We assume permanence. But permanence is an illusion. Even our tallest skyscrapers will one day turn to dust. The only reason ancient temples in Anatolia or stone circles in the Sahara still stand is because they are made of the rare material that resists time. It is unfair to judge the intelligence of a species by the accident of what remained. The truth comes into focus when we remove modern arrogance. Intelligence was not born in a single place at a single time. It blossomed wherever conditions allowed minds to imagine. On riverbanks, on plains, in caves lit by controlled fire, on coastlines swallowed by rising seas. So much time has passed that even the continents have moved. Mountain ranges have risen and worn away. Rivers have changed course. The planet we inhabit is not the same planet that early humans walked across. When we search for ancient structures, we are searching across a constantly changing surface. Many early human sites are buried beneath thick sediments carried by storms or glaciers. Others lie underwater. The absence of discovery does not prove the absence of creation. Each piece of new evidence pushes civilization further away from the clean beginning we were taught. Instead of a straight line rising from nothing to complexity, we see waves of innovation crashing across deep time. Ideas appear, vanish, and re-emerge. Perhaps the urge to build is not progress at all. Perhaps it is instinct, an old instinct inherited from species we barely remember. In the silence of deep time, one realization emerges. We are not the start, we are the continuation. Every civilization stands on the shoulders of others. Everything that makes us human thinking, planning, building, has ancestors. Somewhere in a world older than memory, someone who was not Homo Sapiens placed a stone with intention. Someone shaped a shelter against wind. Someone built a circle in the dark of a cave. We did not invent building. We inherited it. That is where the myth collapses. There is no first civilization in the way we imagined. There is only the last surviving chapter of a story that began long before our arrival. For most of our lives, we are taught a simple story. Humanity began with us. The story centers on Homo sapiens, as though no other intelligent beings ever walked the earth. Yet when we peel back the layers of time, the neat boundaries dissolve. Our species is only one branch of a larger human family. Before us came others. Some walked upright more than 2 million years ago. Some mastered fire before our kind existed. Some crossed mountains and deserts with determination that would rival any modern explorer. They lived and died without leaving monuments of stone, yet they left fingerprints on our genetics, our tools, and our abilities. To understand who built before us, we must first understand who we share the title human with. Imagine the planet 1,500,000 years ago. The world is colder. Massive animals roam across grasslands. Rivers braid through wide floodplains. In this world, a group of travelers follows a seasonal path. They are tall, long-limbed, and their faces look both familiar and strange. Firelight reflects in their eyes as night falls. They are Homo erectus. They walk with purpose. They know how to make cutting tools from stone. The sparks from their fire send small embers swirling upward into the dark. Homo erectus appeared nearly 1,900,000 years ago. Earlier scholars used to imagine them as slow or limited, but their actions reveal something else. They were the first humans to leave Africa, and they reached places that would much later be called Georgia, China, and the islands of Southeast Asia. Migration on that scale requires planning. It requires shared memory and shared intention. Everything we associate with exploration they did without metal, without maps, without writing. They travelled not because chance pushed them forward, but because curiosity and necessity pulled them ahead. Far later on the timeline, a species called Homo heidelbergensis emerges. They appear around 700,000 years ago. Their bodies are strong, their brains large. They are direct ancestors of Neanderthals and possibly of our own species. Evidence shows that they built shelters and organized communal hunting strategies. Imagine a valley where snow falls gently, and a group of these humans places wooden posts around a hearth. Their children play near the fire while the adults prepare tools from shaped stone flakes. It is not a temporary gathering of wanderers. It is a community. Then come the Neanderthals. They appear around 400,000 years ago and remain until roughly 40,000 years before the present. They were not simple cave dwellers. Their brains were on average as large or larger than ours. They controlled fire with precision. They created rope. They made glue from birch bark by heating it without oxygen, which is a controlled chemical process requiring problem-solving skills and knowledge that would challenge even a modern person attempting it from scratch. They hunted big, game with coordinated strategies. They buried their dead with care. In one cave they placed broken stalagmites into a perfect circle deeper underground than sunlight could ever reach, and the radiocarbon dates tell us that this circle was made 176,000 years ago. The fire stains within the ring confirm that flame touched those stones. We examine those burned rocks today as though they are artifacts of some alien intelligence, yet they are simply the work of our relatives. Another branch lives nearby but remains almost invisible in the fossil record. The Denisovans. We know they existed because of fragments of bone and because their genetic code appears in the DNA of modern humans in regions across Asia and Oceania. Current science shows that millions of people living today carry Denisovan ancestry. That ancestry includes adaptations for life at high altitudes, such as the vast plateaus of Tibet. In a cave known as Baishiya in the highlands of Asia, layers of occupations stretch across more than 100,000 years. The people who lived there worked stone into tools suited for cold, thin air. They endured where others would have faltered. Their persistence is itself a kind of monument. When we examine these species in sequence, a picture begins to form. Building emerges not as a sudden invention, but as a gradual inheritance. Toolmaking appears more than 3 million years ago in Eastern Africa. Fire appears hundreds of thousands of years later. Glue, rope, shelters, and long-distance travel arise in different branches across time. Each step is a rehearsal for architecture. To build a shelter, one must gather materials intentionally. To arrange stone into a circle deep in a cave, one must visualize form. To migrate across continents, one must carry memory and plan for a future. We share more with these beings than the shape of our bones. We share their instincts, the instinct to imagine what is not yet there, the instinct to shape the world to suit our needs, the instinct to build. When we tell the story of civilization as though it began only when writing appeared, we erase millions of years of creativity by other humans, not humans in the poetic sense, humans in the scientific sense, members of our extended family. For every relic we find, for every ash layer that tells us fire once burned in the dark, we also understand that countless structures and lives left no trace. We see only the fraction that geology allows us to see. What makes a builder is not the size of the structure, it is the presence of intention. If a being arranges material into form, they are shaping space through thought. By that standard, Homo erectus were builders. Neanderthals were builders. Denisovans may have been builders. Homo heidelbergensis were builders. We are not the first humans to imagine shape and space. We are only the last ones standing long enough to tell the story. If we could stand beside these ancient humans and watch them move, through their world, we would see motions and intentions that feel familiar. A Neanderthal grips a piece of birch bark and folds it carefully before placing it beneath hot embers. He covers it with ash to block oxygen, watching patiently as the bark transforms into a tar-like adhesive. This is chemistry. He tests the sticky black resin between his fingers and nods with satisfaction. Nearby, others carve a spear point. They bind stone to wood using the heated tar, then reinforce the connection with twisted plant fibers. The spear is strong enough to pierce the hide of a wool-bearing rhinoceros. Every step of the process demands foresight. These actions are not instinctive reflexes. They are the result of shared knowledge carried through many generations. The world they inhabit is full of risk and reward. A herd of wild horses moves across a snowy plain. The hunters signal to one another with gestures and soft vocalizations. They surround the herd from different angles, driving the animals toward a narrow gap where the ground slopes downward. This strategy is not accidental. It shows planning, cooperation, and a shared goal. When the hunt is complete, they bring the meat and skins back to a sheltered place. They scrape hides, shape bone tools, and use fire to process fat. These tasks require skill and patience. Their life is not chaos, it is structured. Far to the east, in the high plateaus of Tibet, another branch of our human family adapts to an environment that presses oxygen from the lungs. The Denisovans survive where thin air challenges every breath. In a cave with a view of a valley carved by ancient rivers, they knap stone into tools that fit the tasks of their environment. The layers of sediment in that cave show intermittent occupation across more than 100,000 years. That means generation after generation return to the same place, knowing its safety, its shelter, and its resources. Returning to the same place over long spans of time is not wandering, it is belonging. Meanwhile, on the shores of ancient rivers in Africa, an earlier species taps stones together to create flakes with sharp cutting edges. These tools, found at a site named Lomekwi, are more than 3 million years old. The makers may have been Australopithecus or another early relative, sometimes called Kenyanthropus. Whoever they were, they had the ability to see a shape within unshaped stone. They applied force at the correct angle to produce a blade. This act requires mental visualization. It requires the ability to imagine a future state and then bring it into existence through controlled action. A mind capable of shaping stone is a mind capable of shaping space. Archaeology often reveals the traces of these early minds in small ways. The remains of ancient hearths appear as dark circles of charcoal within layers of lighter sediment. Sometimes there are burned bones nearby. The pattern shows that fire was not random, it was controlled. Fire transforms everything it touches. The decision to gather fuel, to ignite it, to keep it burning through the night reveals planning. Fire is a boundary between darkness and safety. Around that boundary, social life forms. People talk, repair tools, and teach the young. Fire becomes the center of community. In some places, archaeologists find post holes in old soil layers. The wood has vanished completely, but the hollow where it once stood remains. By mapping the pattern of these hollows, researchers can see the layout of a structure. A ring of evenly spaced holes indicates a shelter. Straight parallel lines may indicate a windbreak or corridor. Though the wood is gone, the form remains in negative space. It is an architectural fingerprint. When we think of the first architects, we imagine white stone temples or towering monuments. Yet the first architects may have used branches and hide. If someone places 3 posts upright, leans other branches against them, and stretches animal skins over the frame to create shelter, they have engaged in architecture. They considered weather patterns, wind direction, and the strength of materials. They imagined a concept before executing it. No city is required for architecture. Architecture begins with intention. The more we learn about these ancient species, the more we understand that intelligence is not a sudden explosion unique to Homo sapiens. Intelligence is a long river flowing through time. Our species simply stands at a late point in that river. The genetic record confirms that some of these branches did not just coexist with us, they interbred with us. Many people alive today carry Neanderthal ancestry. Others carry Denisovan ancestry. Within our bodies, fragments of their DNA still influence traits such as immune response or tolerance for high altitudes. Their lives shaped ours in ways we barely understand. When we look at skulls in museums or illustrations in textbooks, we tend to reduce these beings to curiosities. But consider the emotional depth required to bury a child with flowers, a behavior that has been documented at some Neanderthal sites. Consider the symbolic mind required to scatter pigments on rock walls. These acts are not utilitarian. They express something interior, something like meaning. We are not descended from a single linear ancestor that marched steadily toward progress. We are descended from a branching tree with many experiments in intelligence. Some branches faded, others continued. Our branch survived, but survival does not make us the beginning. It only makes us the storytellers. The more we study these early humans, the more their presence surrounds us like silhouettes at the edge of a fire. They are not shadows of lesser beings. They are pioneers. They carried the first sparks of cognition across continents. They shaped tools from stone and shelters from wood. They stared into the night sky and wondered about forces beyond their understanding. Every time we imagine a structure, before it exists in the physical world, we mirror them. Every blueprint, every architectural drawing, every building ever constructed by modern humans is a continuation of a thread that they held first. We did not invent the capacity to build, we inherited it. When we look closely at the timeline of human species, one realization rises to the surface with startling clarity. We were never alone. For most of our existence, the Earth was shared by several kinds of humans at once. To imagine that only Homo sapiens had the ability to build is to ignore nearly 2 million years of evidence. The traces are subtle, but they reveal a truth as firm as any monument carved from limestone. Travel back to the time of Homo heidelbergensis. Snow dusts the ground. A circle of wooden stakes surrounds a hearth. The wind whistles across the plain, but inside the structure it is warm. Sparks rise and vanish into the cold. People sit close to the fire. One individual uses a sharpened flake of stone to cut thin strips from an animal hide. Another scrapes fat from bone and places it near the flames. Children whisper and laugh. Outside, wolves watch from the edge of darkness, but they do not approach. Fire keeps the wild world at a distance. The circle of posts, the orderly arrangement, the maintenance of a shelter through a cold season. These are not the actions of instinct. They are the actions of planning. Shift further in time to a place deep inside a cave in what we now call France. There, hundreds of broken pieces of stalagmite were arranged into a circle far from sunlight. The rock fragments were not scattered. They were placed deliberately, forming rings that required cooperation and shared vision. Scientific analysis shows that fire touched some of these stones. The burned fragments hold a dark memory of flame. When the dates came back more than 170,000 years in the past, many researchers questioned the result. But the sediment layers do not lie. The cave was sealed for ages. It could only have been built by Neanderthals. Deep inside the earth, in complete darkness, a group of humans who were not us created space according to an idea. They shaped their environment into structure. That is architecture. That is civilization in its earliest whisper. Now, imagine a group of Homo erectus standing along the shoreline of a lake during a warm season. The world is alive with reeds and bird calls. They gather stones and place them intentionally to reinforce the base of a shelter made from wood and branches. The bodies of these humans are lean and powerful. Their faces show determination. A small child plays near the water, tapping stones together and watching the flakes fall. In that simple play is the beginning of tool-making. The adult beside the child shows how to strike the stone at a precise angle. Flake, rotate, strike again. The sharp piece is kept, the rest is discarded. The stone becomes a tool because the mind can see its potential shape. They gather around a fire that burns in the center of their temporary camp. The light reflects on their faces. Their thoughts flicker as brightly as the flames. They talk in sounds we cannot reconstruct. They glance toward distant hills with curiosity. Not fear, curiosity, the same force that would carry Homo erectus across continents. Intelligence is not measured by the material of the structure. It is measured by the intention behind it. If someone organizes material into form, according to an internal idea they are building, even if the material decays, even if time destroys every trace, the absence of a fossilized shelter does not prove the absence of a structure. It proves only that it did not survive the violent erosion of deep time. Science is conservative. It demands evidence. It demands measurements, dates, peer-reviewed analysis. And yet science also demands that we do not ignore what evidence implies simply because it challenges our pride. The cognitive capacity required to build a circle of stones deep in a cave is immense. It requires abstract thought. It requires holding a mental image of a structure before that structure exists. It requires communication. It requires a leader saying, "Place that stone here," and others agreeing. When modern people imagine Neanderthals, they often imagine them as brutish or simple. But fossils show healed bone injuries, evidence that injured individuals were cared for by others. That is compassion. They buried their dead with objects. That is meaning. They produced art using pigments. That is symbolism. They created tools of remarkable sophistication. That is innovation. The stereotype of the primitive caveman is not science. It is a myth created by our desire to feel superior. Meanwhile, the Denisovans challenge us in a different way. They left almost no skeletons. For years, some scientists doubted their significance, yet genetics does not bend to assumptions. When the first ancient DNA from their remains was sequenced, the result changed our understanding of human history forever. Their genes live on in modern humans across Asia and the Pacific. They contributed traits that help people survive in environments with low oxygen. They thrived where others struggled. They adapted minds and bodies to mountains taller than clouds. It is difficult to imagine that such endurance and adaptation emerged without some form of collaboration and structured living. People who return to the same cave over tens of thousands of years are not wandering without purpose. They are choosing. They are selecting places based on safety, resources, and memory. A chosen place becomes a home becomes a site becomes a center becomes the seed of civilization. Some species left more than tools. They left echoes inside us. When you take a deep breath in a high-altitude region and feel your body adjust more easily than expected, you may be feeling the influence of DNA from someone who lived 100,000 years. Ago in a world of snow and stone where every breath was a negotiation with the air. Our past is not a single straight line, it is a braid. Strands twist together, separate, and join again. Ideas appear in one branch, then disappear, then return in another. Toolmaking, fire, adhesive technology, rope, shelter, structured space. These are not inventions that appeared once. They are behaviors that evolved, vanished, and evolved again. What we call progress is not a staircase. It is a tide. To accept this is to accept that building began long before writing, long before cities, long before what we call civilization. Building began when a mind became capable of imagining a world that did not yet exist, and then shaping matter to make it real. When we finally confront this timeline without the filters of modern pride, a powerful truth rises up. We were not the only humans. We were not the first to imagine. We were not the first to build. We are merely the last surviving witnesses of a story that stretches beyond the edges of memory. If all earlier structures of wood and hide and bone had survived, we would not be asking whether others built before us. We would be walking through their abandoned halls. And somewhere in those halls, carved into a piece of stone or bone or wood, might be a message that we would finally be prepared to understand. The entrance to Bruniquel Cave does not look like the doorway to a secret held for 176,000 years. From outside, it is an opening in a rocky hillside above a quiet river valley in what we now call southwestern France. The air within is cool and heavy. Water drips rhythmically from distant chambers. The cave smells of stone and deep time. When the modern researchers first entered, they walked on untouched floors sealed since the age of mammoths. Their lights swept over nearly perfect silence until something unexpected appeared. Broken pieces of stalagmite lay arranged into circular forms, not scattered by accident but placed with intention. Inside these rings were signs of fire, burned rock, heat-altered minerals, charcoal. Someone had carried flame deep into this cave in an age when our species did not exist. Most discoveries announce themselves gradually. Sediment slowly reveals a flake here or a hearth there. Bruniquel announces itself all at once. The main structure takes shape beneath beam lights like a skeleton of a forgotten purpose. Researchers map the fragments and realize something astonishing. The stalagmites had been broken to similar lengths and organized into a near-perfect oval and a secondary arc. This was not natural collapse. This was not the slow work of dripping water. This was architecture. The moment the radiometric dates returned, everything changed. Uranium series dating on the stalagmites confirmed their age as older than 176,000 years. The chamber had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. That means the builders were not Homo Sapiens. It could only have been Neanderthals. For generations, these relatives of ours were described as less capable, less imaginative, trapped forever in a stereotype of brutish simplicity. Yet here was evidence that they entered a cave so deep that daylight vanished and then arranged stone into form. That requires far more than strength. It demands coordination, communication, and shared purpose. It demands a leader who suggests where to place each piece, and a group who agrees to follow the plan. The circles are too precise to be chance. The use of fire inside the structure reveals intention. You do not carry flame into blackness without a reason. Consider the challenge. The cave extends far from the entrance. Even today, in a world filled with artificial lights, moving that far into darkness without becoming disoriented would be difficult. The floor is uneven, the air grows colder, water echoes in unpredictable ways. Yet a group of Neanderthals entered, explored, decided on a chamber, broke stone columns from the floor and ceiling, transported the pieces and arranged them into shapes that had meaning for them. Breaking stone in a cave is loud and risky. They continued anyway. It is tempting to imagine them as shadows moving together within the glow of fire. The main circle measures several meters across. The smaller one is placed nearby as though two spaces were needed. The fragments are stacked to form low walls. Some pieces lean against others in deliberate angles. Burn marks appear on the surfaces of many fragments. This means the circles were not merely built and abandoned. They were used. We cannot fully reconstruct what happened inside that chamber. We can only follow the evidence. The circles imply boundaries. Boundaries imply space with purpose. Fire implies gatherings, heat, attention, ritual, or instruction. The absence of bones or tools may point to careful behavior rather than emptiness. Perhaps nothing was left behind because everything of value left with the builders. The greatest error humans make when looking at Neanderthals is assuming that technological simplicity equals cognitive simplicity. Flint tools do not reveal dreams. Bone needles do not reveal language. A circle of stalagmites in utter darkness, however, reveals something different. It reveals imagination. It reveals the willingness to manipulate environment to shape meaning. When the archaeologists finished documenting the structure, they stood in silence. It is difficult to describe what it feels like to witness the result of minds that live so far in the past. In the hush of the cave, you can almost sense a presence. You can picture hands placing each piece of stone on the ground. You can imagine quiet voices echoing off the damp limestone walls. You can feel the heat of a fire that burned for reasons we will never fully understand. Why build inside a cave where day cannot follow? Why not build outside where movement is easier and light is free? Perhaps darkness was the point. Perhaps the cave was a boundary between the ordinary world and the world of story or meaning. In deep caves, the mind behaves differently. Sounds deepen, light becomes alive. A flicker of flame turns rock into moving shape. If Neanderthals gathered there to share knowledge or mark events or speak with memory, then the cave would have amplified their intentions. The next time we see a perfectly cut stone or an ordered column in a modern city, it is worth remembering that long before Homo sapiens built temples, another human placed stone into form. Here, in this forgotten chamber, intelligence took shape. Brunekell offers no written language, no symbols carved into walls, but it offers something even more fundamental. It offers the trace of an idea. Neanderthals were not practicing random behavior, they were engineering space. From that moment onward, the story of building belongs to more than us. The deeper we follow the implications of the cave rings, the more the image of Neanderthals changes. In our imagination, they become smaller and smaller as we grow stronger in our confidence as the final inheritors of intelligence. Yet Brunekell forces us to confront what our pride kept hidden. Intelligence did not begin with us. Creativity did not begin with us. The courage to enter unknown places did not begin with us. Inside the cave, time seems to stretch and pause. The stillness is so complete that even the smallest drip of water echoes like a distant bell. Anyone who has stood inside such darkness knows how quickly the mind begins to invent meaning. Shapes appear where no shape exists. Silence becomes its own voice. Fire does more than provide heat. It creates theatre. It transforms ordinary stone into a backdrop for stories or rituals or teaching. The people who built the rings did not wander into the cave by accident. They brought sources of flame. They broke stalagmites into sections of nearly equal length. They carried these pieces to a chosen chamber. They set them down in lines that bend into arcs. Then they stacked some pieces so that the structures had height. This work took time. It took repeated visits. It took commitment. The cave is far from the entrance. No light reaches that chamber naturally. Every step drained their fuel. They needed to know exactly where they were going. They moved through darkness with purpose. Consider the difficulty of moving as a group through a cave with only the light of small flames. The air cools the further one goes. Moisture makes the ground slick. A wrong turn leads to dead ends. Yet they navigated this space with enough confidence to bring in heavy stones and arrange them. This was not a trial and error jaunt by a frightened band. It was a project. A project implies memory. It implies the ability to plan beyond the present moment. It implies knowledge stored in culture. When we look at the fragments, we see the marks of their hands. They placed some pieces as supports, like columns for leaning. Others formed walls. Their arrangement suggests repeated handling. The surfaces bear stains from soot. Heat altered the colors of certain fragments. The fire that touched the stones left behind mineral shadows. In these shadows, we see ghosts of their presence. Imagine the moment of construction. Several individuals kneel on the cold floor. They speak in quiet sounds. They pass fragments from hand to hand. One indicates a location. Another sets the piece into place. A child watches, absorbing the process. In human species, cooperation is not a rare event. It is a foundation for survival. Yet here, cooperation moved beyond hunting and into architecture. They were reshaping space. The rings themselves are not random circles. Their shape is too precise to be natural scattering. The larger structure is nearly 6 meters across. The smaller one sits nearby like a second chamber. This pairing of shapes hints at organization. It may indicate a main space and a smaller adjoining space. We cannot know the meaning, yet we can know the intention. These rings represent the control of environment. They represent the creation of boundaries. Boundaries are more than lines. They are concepts. To place a boundary between outside and inside is to begin thinking symbolically. That ability is what allows later humans to build temples and houses and eventually cities. Bruniquel may represent the origin of that concept. Order imposed on chaos. Space given purpose through form. The cave offers another clue. The walls near the ring structures show faint traces of pigment in some areas. They also show scratches and marks that appear to have been made deliberately. They are not clear drawings, but they suggest activity beyond simple shelter. When flame flickers across limestone, even a simple line can become animated. Perhaps gestures became stories. Perhaps stories became memory. Within that memory, community is formed. We must consider why Neanderthals chose this location. The chamber is hidden deep in the cave, so they could not have stumbled upon it often. They return there again and again. To do that requires mapping. It requires internal representation of space. They remembered the cave and recalled the path. That demands a mind capable of holding a mental model of the world. When modern explorers enter Bruniquel, they use lights and maps and protective gear. Neanderthals had only their courage and their fire. Many researchers wondered what purpose the rings served. Were they defensive structures, ritual centers, teaching spaces? Some early theories imagined them as animal traps or storage areas, but the placement deep in darkness rejects that idea. No food storing culture would choose a place so inaccessible where spoilage cannot be monitored. The most consistent interpretation among researchers is that the rings represent a social or symbolic place, not a simple dwelling, something else. The Neanderthals who built them had language of some form, not necessarily as complex as ours, but capable of conveying plans. Language emerges from need. A task requiring coordination needs words or sounds that stand for actions. Bring that stone here, hold this, place it there. Without communication, the circles could not be built. It is important to understand how recent our recognition of Neanderthal capability truly is. For decades, they were dismissed as inferior relatives. This narrative grew from fragments of skeletons discovered in the 19th century. At that time, the first Neanderthal remains were reconstructed with bent knees and a stooped posture, because the skeleton belonged to an elderly individual with arthritis. Early scientists mistook illness for inferiority. A myth was born. That myth persisted for generations. Bruniquel is a correction. Through this discovery, we see Neanderthals not as failed versions of us, but as another successful form of humanity. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years through ice age cycles, cold winters, and shifting environments. Their world demanded strength and cleverness. They worked with fire. They shaped adhesives from birch bark through a complex oxygen-controlled process. They made rope. They hunted large animals with cooperative strategies. And in at least one cave they built. This realization changes our position in history. We are not the sole inventors of architecture. We are part of a lineage of builders that stretches back beyond our species. The rings prove that cognitive architecture existed before cities, before agriculture, before Homo Sapiens. The impulse to build is older than we are. And in the darkness of that cave, in the stillness where fire once danced along the stone, humanity was already at work shaping space and meaning. The deeper we contemplate Bruniquel, the more it challenges a fixed idea of what it means to be human. When scientists first traced the forms of the cave rings and realized that Neanderthals had built them, a kind of silence followed that was not the silence of the cave, but the silence of disbelief. If Neanderthals could enter a place without light, bring fire, break stone into standardized segments, arrange them into rings and return repeatedly, then the mental world of Neanderthals was not a flat landscape of survival. It was layered and symbolic. They understood space not as an accident, but as a canvas. Think about how long the cave rings remained untouched. After the last Neanderthal flame cooled and the last footprint settled in the soft cave floor, the entrance sealed naturally. Wind and water over many centuries filled the mouth of the cave with sediment. The world outside changed. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Forests shifted, animals vanished, and new ones evolved. Eventually, Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, unaware that a Neanderthal structure slept beneath their feet. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires argued over land. Stories were written and forgotten. All the while, the rings waited, intact, in darkness deeper than memory. It is humbling to realize how little the earth preserves. Our modern buildings appear permanent, yet even concrete will crumble and steel will rust. A few thousand years of neglect would make our greatest structures vanish beneath soil and forest. We look at ancient stone circles and call them primitive, yet perhaps the only reason we remember them is because they are made of the rare material that time cannot easily consume. Wood disappears, rope dissolves, leather rots. A civilization of wood could die without leaving a trace. A temporary shelter on a floodplain could be erased by a single season of rain. Neanderthals did not dedicate themselves to stone in the way later Homo sapiens did. Their material world was more likely built from what they could carry and shape easily: branches, fibers, animal hide. Structures made from such materials would rarely survive long enough for us to find. Brunickel becomes precious not only because it is rare, but because it reveals that invisible world. It is a doorway into a planet that once belonged to someone else. Researchers studying the cave noticed that the stones are not scattered randomly, but balanced carefully. Some of them lean inwards while others stand upright. That requires an understanding of stability. When a child learns to stack blocks, that child learns balance. These Neanderthals did the same with broken stalagmites. They worked by feel and by sight. They tested stability with their hands. They corrected mistakes. They made choices. Choice is evidence of mind. More than once, experimental archaeologists attempted to reproduce birch pitch, the adhesive that Neanderthals created. At first, they failed. The bark either burned away or charred without turning into resin. Only after recreating a low oxygen chamber and carefully controlling the temperature did the tar appear. Neanderthals discovered this without modern instruments. They learned to manage heat and airflow, not through luck, but through knowledge. If they could solve problems of chemistry, then arranging stone into rings is well within their capabilities. We sometimes forget that every mind is shaped by environment. Neanderthals lived through cycles of cold and scarcity. They needed places of shelter not just for warmth, but for gathering and decision-making. A cave offers acoustics unlike any open space. A single voice echoes across stone walls. That echo transforms even simple speech into something grand. Imagine a moment when someone addressed the group from within the ring. The fire flickers across their face. Shadows climb the walls. Words become presence. Presence becomes power. We have long assumed that symbolism began with us, that ritual began with us, that community began with us. But symbolism can exist in any species that can imagine meaning. If you choose to place stones in a circle instead of scattering them randomly, you have placed a concept into matter. That is symbolism. If you carry fire into darkness because you believe the space matters, that is ritual. If you bring others with you to that space, that is community. Neanderthals occupied Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They adapted to cold climates repeatedly. They survived glacial cycles that would have destroyed cultures less resilient. Homo sapiens entered Europe only near the end of the last ice age. By that time, Neanderthals had already built shelters, used advanced tools, and shaped space deep underground. They were not waiting to be replaced. They were thriving. There is a moment that arrives if you stay in total darkness long enough. After sight fails completely, another sense rises. You become aware of subtle shifts in air temperature. You hear distant droplets in a way that feels almost emotional. Firelight in such darkness does more than illuminate. It transforms the space into a world separate from the outside. A cave ring built in that world is not the same as a structure on open ground. It resonates differently. It tells us something about the inner life of the builders. Their choice of location seems deliberate. They did not use the front chambers of the cave where daylight could creep in. They traveled deep into a realm where the human brain begins to dream while awake. The world outside the cave is governed by seasons and weather and danger. Inside the cave, environment is constant. The temperature barely changes. The rock is silent and ancient. Perhaps Neanderthals went there for the same reason early Homo sapiens later drew animals on cave walls. Darkness intensifies imagination. A common misunderstanding is that technology defines intelligence, but intelligence cannot be measured by the presence of metal or pottery. True intelligence reveals itself in the willingness to imagine something that does not yet exist and then bring it into reality. That is what the cave rings represent. They are the earliest known structures built by humans to serve a purpose beyond mere shelter. They are too deep to be houses. They are too precise to be accidental. They are too intentional to be explained away. The rings whisper a possibility that changes everything. We were not the beginning. We are the continuation of an ancient lineage of builders. When the last fire burned in Bruniquel and the Neanderthals left the cave for the final time, the place did not collapse. It simply waited. The earth pressed sediment against the entrance. Thousands of generations passed. When the cave was finally rediscovered, a team of scientists stood in that silent chamber, headlamps reflecting off the stones that Neanderthals placed by hand. They were the first eyes to see the structure since the last flame died. In that moment, distance collapsed. Time thinned. The wall between us and them disappeared. Stone touched stone, hand touched hand, mind reached mind across 176,000 years. We are not alone in the story of building. We never were. High on the Tibetan plateau, where wind scrapes the earth clean and the air grows thin enough to sting the lungs, there is a cave carved into a cliff of pale limestone. Clouds move below it like slow rivers of sky. Snow lies year-round on distant peaks, and the horizon stretches with nothing to interrupt it but silence. Modern travellers who climb this far feel the lack of oxygen within minutes. Breathing becomes labour. Muscles complain. The mind fogs. Yet something extraordinary happened here. Someone lived in this cave for more than 100,000 years of accumulated time. Not Homo Sapiens, another kind of human. The cave is called Baishiya. For centuries, monks used it as a place of meditation. The cave has a presence. People who enter speak in whispers without knowing why. The walls are cool and smooth, and the ceiling curves like the inside of a massive cathedral formed by nature. Dust swirls gently in shafts of pale light near the entrance. The floor slopes downward to shadows that feel bottomless. When researchers first began to study the sediments, they expected only traces of early Homo sapiens. Instead, they found something that changed the timeline of humanity. Ancient genetic material extracted from soil confirmed the presence of a species known as Denisovans. Before this discovery, Denisovans were almost invisible in the fossil record. They were ghosts known only through fragments of bone and teeth discovered in a cave in Siberia. Their identity had been inferred through DNA, not through daily life or structures or signs of habitation. But Baishiya revealed something different. In this cave, Denisovans lived long enough to leave a record not of words, but of existence. Layer after layer of sediment holds charcoal from fires. There are stone flakes that show repeated napping. The edges are sharp, and the break patterns reveal an understanding of force and precision. These are not random stones washed in by wind. They are tools shaped by hands. The remains of animal bones show cut marks. A jawbone found here, thick and powerful, revealed through analysis that its owner lived nearly 160,000 years ago. Proteins preserved in the ancient teeth confirmed the identity. Denisovan. To live at this altitude demands more than muscle. It demands adaptation. The air here contains less oxygen than sea level. For a modern human not born in these heights, the heart races and the brain struggles. Yet Denisovans lived here long enough that some of their genetic legacy remains in certain populations today. About half of the people living on the plateau carry a gene variant inherited from Denisovans that allows the body to function efficiently in thin air. When a modern climber gasps for breath, someone with that adaptation remains stable. The gift of oxygen tolerance passed across 100,000 years. Standing at the entrance of Baishiya, imagine the scene. A group of Denisovans sits near a fire that flickers orange against The cave walls. One sharpens a stone blade while another scrapes meat from an animal bone. Sparks rise. The air smells of wood smoke and cold rock. Outside the wind roars, but here within the cave is shelter and warmth. Children sleep wrapped in hides. Adults speak in low tones, not language as we know it, but language shaped by meaning and memory. Year after year, generation after generation, they return to the same cave. That act alone reveals thought. Wandering animals do not return to a specific shelter out of choice, but these humans did. They remembered the cave. They remembered the path to it. Knowledge passed down becomes tradition. The layers of sediment show that occupation here was not a brief accident. It unfolded across time so vast that our imagination struggles to hold it. More than 100,000 years of intermittent use. Think of that duration. Civilizations of Homo sapiens rise and fall in a fraction of that span. Names that seem ancient to us, Phidae or Indus or Sumer, lasted only thousands of years. Denisovans used Baishiya across a window of time longer than all recorded human history. Inside the cave, researchers found stone tools shaped in a pattern similar to tools seen thousands of kilometers away. This suggests either long-distance travel or knowledge passed through generations across regions. If Denisovans could move between distant places, if they could remember a route, if they could return to a specific shelter, then their planning extended across years, not just moments. We often define civilization to mean permanent cities, farming, writing. But what if the earliest kind of civilization was not a city but a network of repeated places, a memory of sites, a habit of returning? That is a structure of behavior just as real as a structure of stone. When you build a house, you are saying, "I belong here." When you return to the same cave for 100,000 years, you are saying the same thing. Denisovans left no towering pillars, no engraved stone, no grand monuments. Their architecture was the architecture of endurance. To live at a height that crushes breath is to build structure inside the body. Their lungs adapted, their hearts adapted, their genetic code shifted. They became architecture. Their bodies became the structure that allowed life at the very roof of the world. We have always valued the visible. We praise pyramids and temples because they still stand. But the greatest structure Denisovans built is invisible. It is the modification of the human genome. It is the ability to thrive where air grows thin. It is the passing down of a trait across tens of thousands of years. That kind of construction takes more than stone. It takes time. It takes survival. It takes intention. Through Baishiya, Denisovans step out of myth. They are no longer ghosts known only by genetics. They were engineers of endurance, builders of belonging, designers of life lived on the edge of the sky. They were human. The deeper, researchers dug into the sediments of Baishiya, the stranger the story became. Each layer of earth held a different chapter of occupation. In the oldest layers there were stone tools of a primitive style, irregular flakes and blunt cutters, suggesting early use of the cave. Higher in the sequence were more refined blades. The flakes were thinner, the angles sharper, the break patterns consistent. Those tools are evidence not merely of survival, but of progress. They mark a continuation of skill across vast stretches of time. Each tool was a thought made physical, a memory of technique in material form. The walls of the cave show faint marks that could be the residue of repeated contact. Some areas have smooth surfaces, the rock polished slightly by hands brushing against it while moving deeper inside. On the floor are places where compacted earth suggests repeated sitting or working. These are the kinds of clues that archaeology depends on. They are subtle and easily missed. They require patience to see. When read carefully, they reveal that the cave was not only a shelter from wind, it was a place of gathering, a place where tasks were done and knowledge passed from one person to another. The presence of hearths inside the cave tells us something important. Fire is not simply warmth. Fire is organization. To maintain flame in a high-altitude cave, someone must gather fuel from outside. Wood does not grow easily on the high plateau. Every piece must be carried from lower slopes or collected from sparse shrubs. Fire in this cave is evidence of effort. It reveals that sustaining community here required planning and shared responsibility. Imagine a night in that cave. A group sits together around the glow of a small fire. The air outside is below freezing. The wind howls like an animal trying to claw its way inside. But here, in the circle of firelight, there is safety. There is heat. The walls reflect the flicker. Shadows stretch and shrink with every movement. Someone naps stone into a tool. Another cleans an animal hide with slow, careful motions. A child watches the sparks rise and vanish into darkness. The rhythm of life is simple and repetitive and real. At some point they look out from the cave entrance at the stars scattered above the plateau. The sky at that altitude is unbelievably clear. Stars appear brighter and sharper. The Milky Way stretches like powdered light across the night. For these humans, the sky would have appeared close enough to touch. The stars would have felt like familiar companions. Perhaps constellations carried meaning for them. Perhaps the cave itself was a place where stories were told. One detail stands out. Baishiya is not an easy place to reach. Even today, researchers must ascend steep slopes and cross cold streams to reach the entrance. This suggests that Denisovans did not choose the cave only for convenience. They chose it because it offered something rare. Protection from storms, a vantage point over valleys. Below, a reliable shelter against predators. The repeated use of the cave over 100,000 years is not accidental. Where we see rock and altitude, they saw home. There is a question that lingers. Did Denisovans build anything inside the cave? Wood structures would have vanished without trace. Hides would have decayed. Rope would have dissolved. But there are large, flat stones placed near some of the hearths in ways that seem deliberate. The stones form small platforms or edges. They could be seats or work surfaces. They are not natural formations. Someone moved them into position. In a place where the environment is harsh and resources scarce, moving stones requires effort. Effort reveals intention. Even the act of living here is itself a form of architecture. To adapt the body to this altitude requires genetic selection across generations. It is as though Denisovans built a bridge through time, modifying the human body to become a structure capable of surviving the sky. We often say that architecture shapes the people who live inside it. At Baishiya, the opposite appears true. The people shape themselves into architecture. The more data emerges, the more the world of Denisovans expands. Genetic evidence shows that they interbred with both Neanderthals and Homo Sapiens. This means that these species were not isolated islands. They were rivers that joined and separated and joined again. Information could travel across these rivers. A technique learned in one region could appear in another. Knowledge could flow. That flow is its own kind of structure, a structure of memory. Some researchers believe that Baishiya may have been more than a shelter. The depth of occupation, the repeated use of the same hearth spaces, the positioning of stone platforms, all suggest something beyond mere survival. They hint that the cave may have served as a seasonal center, a place of repeated return where different groups of Denisovans converged. Modern humans sometimes have sacred or communal spaces that are not settlements. People gather there for events, then disperse. Baishiya might have served a similar purpose, a gathering place on the roof of the world. Consider the scale of time again. 100,000 years. That is not a camp. That is not a temporary stop. That is tradition. The cave is not just shelter, it is identity. To live here year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, is to build something real. Not a structure of stone that reaches toward the sky, but a structure of memory that reaches across time. A place becomes part of a people. When returning to it becomes a story every child learns. Picture a group leaving the cave at the start of a season, descending toward warmer valleys to hunt and gather. They know that when storms return, they will climb the slopes once again and return to Baishiya. Their footsteps are not random. They follow the same route their ancestors followed. This is architecture without walls. The landscape becomes the structure. The scientific image of Denisovans grows clearer every year, yet so much remains unknown. Their language, their stories, their dreams. The space inside Baishiya suggests that they had an inner world as rich and complex as ours. The fire circles hint at social structure. The tools reveal skill. The genetic adaptations show endurance and innovation. We tend to think of prehistoric humanity as a struggle for survival, but this cave shows that survival was not the only priority. There was continuity, there was belonging, there was meaning. Denisovans did not leave writing. They left something more durable. They left a pattern of returning. They left a structure shaped by time. They left themselves inside us. When we stand in Baishiya today, we are standing inside a living question. The cave is silent, but the silence is not empty. It is dense, charged, waiting. The walls carry a presence that is hard to describe. People who enter often feel a pull, a sense that something important once happened here. The cave does not feel abandoned. It feels paused. To understand why this matters, imagine the world as the Denisovans knew it. The plateau stretches outward like an ocean of rock. Winds roll across the land with a force that can lift loose snow and fling it into the air like powdered stars. The cold is not a simple cold. It is sharp and hungry. It takes energy just to breathe. Yet in this cave, the air is still. The wind cannot touch you. The fire warms the space. It becomes an island in a sea of winter. To survive here, a mind must think ahead. A mind must prepare. Each action is a calculation. Fuel must be gathered before nightfall. Tools must be sharpened before the next hunt. Paths must be remembered before storms erase footprints. Planning becomes second nature. Awareness becomes instinct. Every fire in this cave was a decision made days before the flame existed. The genetic adaptation found in modern Tibetans does not appear by accident. It requires a population to remain at altitude over countless generations. Some individuals are born with slight advantages in oxygen processing. Those individuals survive more easily and pass that trait on. Slowly, the trait strengthens. Slowly, the entire community becomes capable of living where others would weaken. This is the architecture of biology. Denisovans did not build towers of stone. They built bodies adapted to the sky. Because of their DNA, we know that they interbred with Homo Sapiens. This tells us that when our ancestors met them, they did not see a monster. They saw another human. We do not share children with species we view as beasts. We share children with those we recognize as kin. Somewhere on a mountain path or in a sheltered valley, a Denisovan and a Homo sapiens looked at one another and saw familiarity. In that moment, we became connected not only by space but by blood. The more we study ancient humans, the more we realize that the borders between species were not walls. They were rivers that flowed together. Denisovans contributed genetic gifts that remain active in the bodies of modern humans. In a real sense, their architecture lives through us. When we look around the cave, we search for signs of structure. We imagine wooden posts or hide screens or racks for storing meat. But the cave itself is a structure. The rock is the roof. The ceiling is the sky made solid. All they needed to do was shape the interior. They moved stones to make work platforms. They cleared areas for sleeping. They placed fire at the center to create warmth and light. They organized space not by bricks and mortar, but by behavior. Civilization does not begin with walls. It begins with repeated gathering. If a location becomes central to a group, if it becomes part of the group identity, then that location becomes architecture through meaning. Baishiya was not a home in the simple sense. It was a center, a place where knowledge returned, a place where memory lived. A child born near the cave learns its name, learns where the good hunting grounds are, learns the path to the stream that does not freeze even in the coldest seasons. The cave becomes part of the mind. Each journey away is temporary. The cave calls them back. Even before writing, humans have always named the places that matter. Perhaps Denisovans did the same. Consider the first time a young Denisovan child steps into the cave, their hand in that of an elder, their breath catching at the sudden change from harsh wind to stillness. They see the light of the fire and the faces gathered around it. They smell roasted meat. They feel warmth. They understand in an instant that this place is safety. Memory attaches to feeling, feeling attaches to place, place becomes sacred. When scientists analysed the cave sediments and confirmed the presence of Denisovan DNA, it marked a turning point. The invisible species became visible. For the first time, we could place Denisovans in a location not by fragments of bone, but by life. We could see how they shaped their surroundings. We could map their actions. We could follow their fires across millennia. There is a moment in every scientific discovery where imagination and evidence meet. Standing in that cave, with wind howling outside and silence within, imagination awakens. You begin to see that these humans might have understood the cave in ways we cannot. To return to the same shelter over so many ages suggests that this place was not only useful, it was meaningful. Even today, the cave serves spiritual purpose for local monks. They come here to meditate, they kneel in positions of stillness, they breathe slowly in the thin air and surrender to the quiet. The cave continues to draw humans, even ones separated from Denisovans by more than 100,000 years. Meaning leaves an imprint deeper than time. We once believed that Denisovans were simply a genetic footnote, but Baishiya shows that they were builders. Not builders of cities or pillars, but builders of endurance, builders of memory, builders of belonging. The world today is filled with monuments that declare our intelligence, skyscrapers, satellites, metal and glass. Yet, in 10,000 years those structures may crumble. In 20,000 years they may vanish entirely. Baishiya teaches us that sometimes the most enduring structure is not made from material, but from repetition. A place becomes architecture when it becomes part of a story. And the story of Baishiya is the story of a species that claimed a part of the sky. For a very long time we asked where the first civilization began. We assumed it began when humans began to build. But if building also means returning, planning, adapting, and shaping our world through knowledge, then civilization began not on a river plain with writing, but here, in a cave above the clouds, where a different kind of human touched the roof of the world and made it home. We often say that history is written by the victors, but prehistory is written by the survivors. Denisovans did not leave writing, they left breath inside the bodies of those who descend from them. When a climber stands at a summit in Tibet and feels calm instead of dizzy, when they breathe with steady lungs and strong blood, it is not only their strength that holds them there, it is the gift of a people who lived and loved in a cave above the world. They built something that never collapsed. They built us. The oldest known hut, built by human hands, rests beside the ancient shoreline of what was once a warm coastal inlet in southern France. The place is called Terra Amata. The sea has long since pulled back, leaving only stone and sand. But in the sediments of that lost beach, scientists discovered something that should not exist at that age: a circle of post holes, burned wood, a carefully cleared floor of compacted stone, the remains of a hearth at its centre, and around that hearth traces of a structure that once stood against wind. It was built by Homo erectus, not by Homo Sapiens. If you walk the site in the present day, it appears empty, just broken rock and dry grass. The waves now break far from where that shelter once stood. But more than 400,000 years ago, a group of early humans stood on a sandy shore and decided to change their surroundings. They planted wooden posts into the ground. They leaned branches inward to form a roof. They ringed the interior floor with stones. They made a place where wind could not reach them and rain could not steal their fire. This is the moment when shelter became a plan. Before Terra Amata, survival meant adapting to what nature offered. After Terra Amata, survival meant shaping nature to match an idea. The difference seems small when written on a page, but in the world of the mind it is enormous. Animals react, engineers anticipate. Imagine the shoreline, beaches filled with driftwood and smooth stones. Homo erectus stands upright, tall and powerful, with limbs shaped by relentless travel. Fire crackles in the center of the cleared space. Smoke rises into air still warm from daylight. A few individuals gather more branches from the nearby dunes. Another arranges stones in a circle to secure the edges. They are not merely responding to weather, they are creating environment. To build anything, one must first imagine it. That realization strikes like lightning. For the first time in deep time, a human brain held a structure in thought before it existed in reality. That invisible structure inside the mind guided the placement of posts, the sweep of branches inward toward the central hearth, the careful organization of sleeping space and work area. In that moment, a blueprint came into being. One can almost feel the discussion that must have occurred without words. Place the post here, angle this branch there, put the fire in the center, stones around the edge. These motions require cooperation. Cooperation requires intention. Intention requires mind. Homo erectus shows that building did not appear suddenly with Homo sapiens. It evolved slowly through experimentation. These shelters were not random piles of wood. The post holes prove planning. Their arrangement forms a continuous line. The circle is not perfect, but it is consistent. The hearth sits in the middle, exactly where a hearth should be. Smoke rises through the opening at the top where branches meet. This is a deliberate vent. The floor is cleared of debris and ringed with stones to prevent erosion. None of these choices appear by accident. Storms would come across the ancient shoreline, winds rising from the sea. Inside the shelter, firelight would paint the interior with orange glow. The surf would roar outside, but the shelter would hold steady. Homo erectus could sit, work stone tools, prepare food, and sleep while rain hammered the world beyond. Before Terra Amata, the world shaped early humans. After Terra Amata, humans shaped the world. Fire changed everything. The moment fire becomes constant, the night becomes optional. Activity can continue beyond sunset. Stories can be shared, tools can be made, food can be cooked. Fire is the first technology that expanded time. Inside the hut, a group sits in a wide circle, knees drawn close to the warmth. A spark jumps upward into the opening where the branches meet. Smoke drifts lazily toward the top and escapes into the cool night. One person chips a stone into a hand axe. Another prepares animal skins to wrap around shoulders. A child watches flames bend and tremble. In that flame is safety. In that flame is memory. Outside the hut, the night is alive with sound. Waves crash. Birds cry across the water. The scent of salt drifts inland. But in the shelter, humans are free to think, free to plan, free to imagine a future. This idea, the idea of shaping space with purpose, spreads. Terraced living areas appear along rivers. Other coastal shelters appear in Africa and Asia. Wherever Homo erectus travels, they carry the concept of shelter with them. It becomes part of culture, a lesson passed to children without writing, without speech as we know it, but through action. Watch what I do as I do. Remember, Homo erectus was the first human to leave Africa and explore the world. They walked from one continent to another with no map. They crossed deserts, river valleys, volcanic plains. They adapted to forests, coastlines, mountains. Their presence appears in Asia, in Europe, in islands separated by water. To reach those islands, they must have crossed water long before Homo sapiens even existed. Did they build rafts? The idea is no longer unthinkable. A species that can build a hut from branches and posts can certainly bind logs together. Their tools show that they understood leverage and force. If the ocean stood between them and the unknown, they did not turn back. When we find the traces of Terra Amata, we are not looking at primitive scraps. We are looking at the blueprint of all later architecture. Every house, every temple, every skyscraper. Each one follows the same basic logic: create boundaries, protect fire, shape space. The shelter at Terra Amata did not survive because it was built with wood and hide. Time destroys everything that is not stone, but the ground remembers, the post holes remain, the scorched stones of the hearth remain, the idea remains. And the idea is what matters. The most astonishing part is not the structure itself, it is the distance. Terra Amata sits more than 2,000 kilometers from the place where Homo erectus first emerged in Africa. They traveled on foot across vast, stark plains and through forests where predators ruled. They followed rivers. They crossed mountain passes. They adapted to new seasons and new landscapes. With each journey, they carried the knowledge of shelter. When building becomes memory and memory becomes culture, a species transforms. At Terra Amata, we see the first engineers. They took the raw materials of the world and shaped them into space. They created inside and outside. They made a moment of permanence in a world of constant motion. They changed what it means to be human. Homo erectus carries a secret that changes the way we understand our own species. They did not simply survive, they explored. They tested boundaries. They crossed distances greater than any other animal of their time. Their bones appear across continents separated by thousands of kilometers. Even now, scientists struggle to understand how they reached certain islands, but the evidence sits in the soil. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, at a time when sea levels were far lower, Homo erectus, or a direct descendant, somehow crossed water. There is no land bridge there. To reach that island requires leaving the sight of land. No predator does that. No prey does that. Only humans do that. At Terra Amata, the idea of structure began with hut walls of wood. On the island of Flores, the idea of possibility began with open water. Once a mind accepts that the world can be changed, that same mind begins to see paths where none existed. A tree trunk is no longer just a fallen shape on the ground. It becomes a vessel. A piece of driftwood becomes a tool. A river becomes a path toward a new horizon. The shelter at Terra Amata is more than a hut. It is evidence of an internal shift. Fire appears at the center of human life, and suddenly the night loses its power. Before fire, the world belonged to darkness. After fire, darkness becomes a choice. Work extends beyond daylight. Stone tools can be shaped into finer edges. People can gather and stay together. Fire creates community. When we picture Homo erectus, we must not imagine a solitary figure staring at embers. We must imagine a group. One cleans a fish caught in the nearby tidal pools. Another grinds plant fibers for rope. A child plays, imitating the motions of adults, placing small sticks into the sand in a rough circle. These gestures are how culture travels from one generation to the next. No written language, no teacher, just observation and repetition, a blueprint stored in behavior. To clear the floor of a hut requires more than instinct. One must decide that the presence of stones inside the shelter creates discomfort or danger. Then one must clear them. The circular pattern of the post holes shows that someone understood geometry, not the mathematics of symbols, but the mathematics of intuition. A circle distributes load evenly. A circle shelters people around a shared center. A circle brings everyone close to the fire. The first houses were not about privacy. They were about connection. When the wind rises and rain lashes against the outside world, a circle of bodies around fire becomes a single unit. Words or sounds pass back and forth. The child in the circle learns that fire belongs inside, not outside. They learn where stones should be placed. They learn that a roof leans inward so water slides down. Knowledge grows each time someone copies what they have seen. The reason Homo erectus could spread across the world is because they learned to remember, not in writing and not in speech as we understand it, but through method, a method of action, a method of teaching through movement. This memory allowed them to track seasons, follow herds, recognize which plants were safe, and which rivers led to new coasts. They studied landscapes through rhythm, not maps. On a beach near Terra Amata, footprints once pressed into wet sand beneath the first shelter. Those prints are gone now, washed away long before our species existed. But the idea that made those prints remains, the idea that we can shape the world. When researchers studied the site, they noticed something else. The hearth at the center was not the only one. At different layers there are 2, sometimes 3, suggesting that the group returned again and again across seasons. They may have rebuilt the hut each time. They may organize the interior differently depending on wind or weather. Each time they returned, the past guided their hands. Inside those layers is the earliest trace of architectural memory. Picture a moment at the end of a day. The sea has turned black, The air cools quickly. The shelter glows from the interior as the fire grows brighter. Sparks dance upward toward the vent. Outside the circle of light, night presses close. Inside, the warmth spreads across skin, across bone, across thought. Someone breaks a piece of driftwood and places it gently onto the flame. The wood pops, releasing the scent of resin. Someone else leans against the wall of the hut. They listen to the waves. They close their eyes. They feel safe. It is impossible to overstate the significance of this feeling. Safety gives birth to imagination. When a creature no longer fights every moment to survive, the mind begins to wander. It begins to wonder. What is beyond the river? What is beyond the ridge? What is beyond the horizon? Great journeys begin not with strength but with curiosity. Homo erectus was the first human to ask what lies beyond. They left footprints in Eastern Africa, in the Levant, in China, in Europe, in islands across Southeast Asia. They walked farther than any species before them because they could build shelter wherever they went. That ability freed them from the limits of environment. Wherever there was wood or branches or driftwood, a home could exist. They were engineers, not because they built something grand, but because they understood adaptation. They used the land as material. They used memory as blueprint. They used cooperation as structure. Near the hearth, stone tools scatter the floor. Dozens of flakes lie around the main workspace. Some are razor sharp, others have been discarded. A stone tool is not only a weapon, it is a part of the mind made physical. The toolmaker strikes the core stone at just the right angle, and a flake splits cleanly. They rotate the stone. Strike again. A pattern emerges. Work becomes practice. Practice becomes method. Method becomes culture. On the horizon, gulls glide over the water, and the breeze carries the scent of seaweed. The shelter stands firm. Each post leans inward slightly. The branches are lashed to cross pieces with twisted fibers. Rain beads on the outside rather than dripping through. Homo erectus did not invent knots in the elaborate modern sense, but they understood binding. They could twist fibers into cords. They could secure the roof. These actions form the first engineering principles: stability, support, balance, ventilation, protection. Even in their simplest form, the huts show that Homo erectus did not simply occupy space. They organized it, and from organization, the world begins to change. When night falls fully, one person feeds the fire while the others settle in the warmth. Sparks drift upward like tiny drifting stars. The sound of waves is steady. The air smells of salt. Above them, the real stars ignite one by one, filling the dark with a map no one has ever charted. But in the glow of that shelter, a subtle shift begins. A thought forms. If we can build a home here, we can build a home anywhere. That single sentence is the root of every city on Earth. The remains of Terra Amata give us only a circle of post holes and a blackened hearth. Yet from those faint traces, we can reconstruct an entire moment in human evolution. A species that once depended entirely on what nature provided learned to create shelter where none existed. The world shifted. A new possibility entered the mind. Space could be shaped. Space could be changed. Space could become ours. But Terra Amata is only one footprint in the path of Homo erectus. Their story stretches across continents. Stone tools in Georgia near the borders of Europe show that they reached that region nearly 1 million years ago. Fossils in China reveal that they lived there for generations upon generations. In Java, their bones rest beneath layers of volcanic ash that speak of eruptions and floods and time. Wherever their tools appear, a pattern follows. They return to familiar places. They treated certain landscapes as centers. Just as Denisovans returned to Baishiya again and again, Homo erectus returned to Terra Amata. Memory guided them. The human imagination began here, perhaps not the imagination of art or myth, but the imagination of the possible. To build a shelter is to declare that the world can be altered according to a mental plan. That act marks the beginning of engineering, and once a species learns to shape space, it becomes capable of shaping time. A shelter allows you to wait, to plan, to choose the moment of action. Inside that circle of posts, time behaves differently. There is a boundary between the wild and the domestic. The wind outside may scream with winter, but inside the fire speaks in crackles and sighs. A child curls against the body of an adult. The flames cast slow-moving shadows on the curved roof. Sparks drift upward through the vent in the ceiling and vanish into the night. The shelter is alive with motion, with breath, with soft conversation in sounds that are no longer merely instinct, but something approaching language, a gesture, a sound, a repeatable signal, the first architecture of communication. We are taught that civilization began when humans settled permanently in one place, when they grew crops, built walls and raised monuments. But that definition ignores the truth revealed at Terra Amata. Civilization does not begin with walls. It begins with planning. It begins when the future becomes something a mind can shape. The ocean speaks at night. Waves rise and break. Foam pushes across the sand. The people inside the hut hear the rhythm and know the rhythm. They have learned the seasons. They have memorized the tides. Knowledge is no longer just an instinct carried in the blood. It is information carried in memory. Each member of the group holds a part of their world in the mind. They know where fresh water pools in the rock after rain. They know which season brings fish close to the shore. They know which direction the wind will blow when storms form beyond the headland. The shelter allows them to stay long enough to learn. We often imagine that building began suddenly, as if one day a human decided to become an architect. But the roots of architecture are slow and patient. A shelter begins with a post, then a roof, then the idea that shelter can be improved. Each improvement becomes culture. Culture becomes inheritance. When the shelter collapses under winter storms or heavy wind, they rebuild. The next hut might be stronger. The floor might be clearer. The arrangement of sleeping and working space may shift. The hut is not a structure of static repetition. It evolves. It responds, it grows. Evolution is not only for bodies, it also applies to ideas. On that ancient shoreline, a moment arrives that repeats every season. The group prepares to migrate. They gather their tools. They tie ropes of twisted fiber around bundles of dried meat. They pack their stone flakes and hand axes. Someone takes one last look at the shelter. Flames from the dying fire cast dim light on the posts. The sand inside the hut retains warmth. The floor remembers footsteps. They leave nothing behind but the trace of intention. They walk away. The sea breeze erases their footprints within minutes. Rain falls. Wind tears at the roof. The posts loosen. Branches collapse. The shelter disintegrates. Everything disappears. Yet something remains that the storm cannot touch. The memory. When the seasons return, they return. That loop is as important as any wall or foundation. It means that a structure exists not only in materials but in minds. A shelter held in memory becomes a location in time. The idea of home is born. We underestimate Homo erectus because the only things that survive across hundreds of thousands of years are stone tools and burnt earth. Their wood, their fiber, their rope, their shelters, their possible rafts, their woven grasses, all vanish. Archaeology remembers stone not because stone is superior, but because stone refuses to die. The world is biased toward what time allows to survive. If wood lasted as long as stone, the story of human architecture would begin, not with us, but with them. Look again at that ancient hut. At its center burns a hearth, fire protected from wind and rain. Fire that warms food and bodies. Fire around which humans gather. Fire is the first city. The hearth is the first center. The circle of posts is the first wall. Every city that has ever existed still turns around a center, a plaza, a temple, a market, or a monument. Terra Amata shows that the instinct to gather around a center was born long before writing, long before farming, long before Homo sapiens. We inherited that instinct from them. Homo erectus traveled farther than any previous human. They stood on shores our species had not yet imagined. They crossed water. They engineered space. They discovered that the world could be shaped. Without them, our story does not begin. We did not invent the urge to build, we inherited it. And somewhere on a shore 400,000 years ago, beneath a roof of branches lit by the glow of firelight, a human ancestor looked out at the dark horizon and imagined a world they had not yet reached. That moment is the beginning of every structure that followed. The wind that crosses the valley of Lomekwi carries sand across the broken slabs of basalt and granite. The air trembles in the heat rising from the ground, and the horizon flickers with mirages. Nothing about this landscape hints at its significance. There are no monuments, no carvings, no remnants of walls or pillars. Yet beneath layers of sediment and time, beneath volcanic ash, compacted by the weight of millions of seasons, lies the first physical evidence that a mind once imagined a tool before it existed. 3,300,000 years ago, long before our species existed, long before the first hut or the first controlled fire, a creature walked upright across this land. The maker was small, with long arms and curved fingers, and a brain less than half the size of a modern human. Yet their hands held an idea that did not exist anywhere else on Earth. They picked up a stone not to throw, not to crack nuts, not to defend, but to change it. The moment they struck one stone against another with intention, the world shifted. Imagine the first attempt. The early primate lifts a stone because of its weight and shape. They bring it down onto another stone. The first strike misses. The second causes only dust. On the third strike, a fragment flies off with a sharp edge. They stare at the fresh flake. They run a finger across the new surface. The edge bites the skin. Something sparks behind the eyes. They pick up the flake and press it to a plant stem. It cuts, not like a claw or a tooth. Clean, fast, direct. The creature does not understand language, but they understand transformation. This is the moment intention enters the material world. The Lomekwi tools are large and heavy, often more than a grown person can hold comfortably in one hand. They were meant to be smashed against logs or bones. Some were anvils, some were hammers. This was not delicate craft, it was power shaped into purpose. Recent high-speed imaging of replicated Lomekwi techniques shows that even a slight change in wrist angle alters the fracture pattern of a stone. That means that 3 million years ago, something learned to modify its motor movement to achieve a desired result. These early toolmakers did not act randomly. They repeated actions until outcome matched intention. Repetition is memory. Memory is learning. Learning is culture. The word culture does not mean cities or art or writing. Culture begins when knowledge passes from one mind to another. A juvenile watches an adult strike stone. The juvenile picks up a stone and imitates. The flake breaks incorrectly. The juvenile tries again. After several attempts, a usable flake appears. Knowledge travels through time without language. At that moment, culture exists. The wind had blown for countless seasons before this event, and will blow for countless more after. But something fundamental separates every moment before from every moment after. The world has been modified by expectation. The toolmaker looked at the stone and saw more than stone. They saw possibility. The idea did not arrive because of brain size. It arrived because of curiosity and patience. Intelligence is not a number measured in volume of grey matter. Intelligence is the act of imagining something beyond immediate instinct. The primates of Lomekwi lived without shelter. They did not yet build walls or roofs. Their world was open. They relied on caves during storms and tree branches during sleep. They lived in small groups, moving across a world filled with predators. Yet each stone fragment they shaped made the world slightly more predictable, slightly more under their control. Tools allowed access to new foods. New foods fed larger brains. Larger brains fed deeper planning. Planning fed cooperation. From stone to fire. From fire to shelter. From shelter to architecture. The path begins here. A chipped stone is not a building, but it is the beginning of building. Before one can raise a wall, one must first recognize that natural objects can be changed. Every hut, every temple, every city begins in the instant. One brain holds a model of something that does not yet exist. The Lomekwi toolmaker holds that model, and once a creature can hold a model of the future begins to belong to them. At the start of the 10th millennium before the present, the world was healing. The great ice sheets that once covered the northern continents were melting. Rivers cut through fresh soil, carving new paths. Lakes formed where glaciers once stood as gods of ice. Herds of gazelle wandered across plains that had only recently emerged from cold silence. Humans followed these herds, moving with the rhythm of seasons. They were nomads, never staying in one place long enough for permanence to take root. Their shelters were temporary, made of branches and hides that left no trace in the archaeological record. They owned only what they could carry. Yet, on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, these same nomads did something impossible. They built a monument. Not a shelter, not a campfire ring, not a windbreak, but a structure that required planning far beyond survival. The place we call Göbekli Tepe rises slowly from the earth. To an untrained eye, the landscape looks like an ordinary hill, but beneath this hill lie stone circles older than any known temple and older than agriculture. Each circle is composed of enormous pillars shaped from limestone. Some stand almost as tall as two grown men. Some weigh more than 15 metric tons. Every pillar required cutting bedrock, shaping stone, and transporting it across distance. This was not the work of a moment. This was the work of vision. Archaeologists once believed that civilization began only after humans invented agriculture. The logic was simple. Farming produces surplus food. Surplus food supports specialists. Specialists design architecture. Architecture builds society. But Göbekli Tepe shows something entirely different. The monument predates agriculture by thousands of years. Agriculture did not lead to monumental building. Monumental building may have led to agriculture. The pillars are not blank. Their surfaces are alive with carvings. Foxes leap across one pillar. Snakes coil across another. On one pillar, a vulture spreads its wings and carries what looks like a human form beneath it. These creatures are not drawn crudely. They are rendered with confidence and clarity. Someone understood the animal's form and translated it into stone. Every line, every curve, every incision required hours of focused cutting using sharp stone tools. The builders were hunter-gatherers, yet they made art with a precision that suggests patience and intention. Consider the labor involved. To erect a single pillar, people had to cooperate. One person cannot lift a 15 metric ton block. Dozens must coordinate. They must control the angle of ropes. They must keep rhythm as they push and pull. They must decide where the pillar will stand and how the circle will be shaped. This requires leadership, communication, and mutual purpose. It requires trust. Trust is the beginning of shared identity. Shared identity is the beginning of culture. The site is composed of many circles, not one. When archaeologists remove sediment, more circles appear. Each one has two central pillars at the heart of the enclosure. These pillars often face each other. They form a focal point. This symmetry suggests memory. Humans were not randomly stacking stones, they were creating patterns. Geometry existed before writing. At night, thousands of years ago, firelight would have danced across the polished limestone. Shadows of animal carvings would flicker in motion. People would have gathered inside the circles, their faces lit in orange glow. They would hear the wind brushing over the ridge. They would smell smoke and roasting meat. They might have discussed hunting routes or migrations. They might have shared origin stories. We will never know the words, but we know the feeling. A shared space shapes shared meaning. The most extraordinary discovery came not from the carving or the pillars, but from the earth itself. After centuries of use, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Humans filled the circles with soil, stone fragments, and refuse. They sealed their greatest work. It was not covered by landslide or flood. It was buried intentionally by the hands that built it. Such behavior demands questions. Why bury a place that demanded such effort to build? Was it an ending? Was it a transition? Was it gratitude or grief? Or the silent acknowledgement of change? Archaeologists cannot answer with certainty. There are no carvings that say why. There are no bones of kings, no script, no explanation. All that remains is the physical act. A monument was created and then hidden. Intent lies heavy in that act. Perhaps the site had fulfilled its purpose. Perhaps the people were changing. Perhaps agriculture was beginning. Nearby, making old ways obsolete. Perhaps they believed that memory sometimes needs to sleep. Göbekli Tepe forces us to abandon the simple story we are taught. Humans did not begin building after they settled. Humans settled after they began building. The monument created the gathering created the village made farming necessary. The sequence reverses the logic of civilization. Architecture was not a consequence of society. Architecture was the catalyst for society. Building came first. In this place on the limestone ridge, humans discovered how powerful it was to gather. They learned that shared labor binds people more deeply than shared blood. They learned that architecture can hold emotion. They learned that construction can hold memory. They also learned that one does not need permanence to create legacy. Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that the desire to build is more ancient than the desire to stay. We do not build because we have civilization. We have civilization because we build. In the far reaches of what is now the Sahara Desert, a dry lake bed called Nabta Playa lies quiet beneath the sun. The surface looks unremarkable. Wind presses dust into ripples and the horizon shimmers with heat. Yet beneath these shifting sands lies a structure that disrupts everything we assume about ancient humans. Long before the first stones of the Egyptian pyramids were cut, long before writing or metal or kings, people gathered here to build. They did not build walls or roofs or monuments to power. They built time. 7,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. Seasonal rains filled basins with water. Grasslands stretched across what is now endless sand. People who lived here did not farm. They were pastoralists who moved with their herds, letting cattle graze when the seasonal rains returned. Life depended on knowing the sky. The return of rain meant life. Its absence meant death. In that world, knowledge was survival. At Nabta Playa, early humans arranged stones into a circle. Each stone stands upright, placed with intention and aligned with the summer solstice. When the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, the shadows cast by the stones align in a straight line that points toward the place where rains would soon return. This required observation, not over days, but across decades. A single person cannot learn these patterns alone. Elders must teach the young. Memory must accumulate. For this to happen, knowledge must outlast individual lives. That means culture, not instinct. The desert erases everything except stone. The hides and wooden poles of temporary shelters rot, but stones endure. When archaeologists first studied the Nabta Playa alignment, they realized that these stones could not have been dropped by nature. The placement is too precise. Each stone was carried from nearby bedrock, stood upright, and angled toward a specific point on the horizon. The stones do not mark power or wealth. They mark a moment in time. Architecture becomes astronomy. Imagine the people of Nabta Playa. They walk across grasslands that no longer exist. The air smells of wet earth after the seasonal rain. They gather near the stones. The sky begins to fill with stars. Without light pollution, the night sky is a river of silver. Every star is clear and sharp. Children lie on their backs and trace the patterns. Each child knows the sky will decide whether their herd finds water or dies beneath the sun. The people watch. They measure. They wait. They are not reading a calendar on a wall. They are reading the sky itself. This is not primitive behavior. This is data collection. The stone circle marked the solstice long before Egypt aligned pyramids to cardinal directions or stars. Complex pattern recognition existed here in open desert. Knowledge guided architecture, and architecture preserved knowledge. The stones did not shape the environment. They shaped memory. A similar impulse appears far to the north at Karahan Tepe, another site in what is now southeastern Turkey. The landscape is rocky, carved by water over many thousands of years. The builders of Karahan Tepe carved deep chambers into bedrock. Inside these chambers are dozens of tall pillars that rise like silent observers. At the back of one chamber, a carved human figure with round eyes gazes into the space. The shape is smooth, the walls curve. When a person enters the chamber, sound shifts and echoes as if the room were designed to hold voice. It may have been a gathering place, a place of sound, a place where shared presence mattered more than walls or roofs. Karahantepe and Nabta Playa reveal a pattern that is now impossible to ignore. The earliest architecture humans created was not designed to protect bodies. It was designed to protect meaning. These are not shelters. They are memory structures. They organize time, space, identity, and shared experience. They prove that complexity can emerge before agriculture, before kings, before cities. Historically, researchers assumed humans built monuments only after they settled into villages and farms, because only sedentary people could spare the time and labor needed. But these ancient structures show the opposite. Hunter-gatherers and pastoralists built monuments first. The act of building brought people together. Gathering led to community. Community led to the idea of staying instead of moving. Staying led to agriculture. Agriculture led to cities. Architecture is not the result of civilization. Architecture is the cause. It is easy to imagine early humans as simple, focused only on survival. But when we follow the evidence, we see a different truth. Intelligence does not wait for writing. Curiosity does not wait for farming. Vision does not wait for permanence. In Nabta Playa, the people built a map of the heavens on earth. In Karahantepe, they carved spaces to gather. They built because something within them needed to understand their place in the world. They built because building binds people together. The desert wind moves across the stones. The sand remembers where the builders stood. The stars still rise in predictable rhythm. The people who built Nabta Playa are gone, but the sky remembers them. Building did not begin with shelter. Building began with meaning. The past is filled with structures we will never see, not because they were never built, but because the earth does not keep records kindly. When the last great ice age reached its peak, gigantic sheets of frozen water pressed down on continents. Valleys flattened, forests vanished beneath the weight of ancient ice, and entire ecosystems shifted southward. At that time, sea level sat more than 120 meters lower than it does today. What is now ocean floor was once grassland and river delta. What is now coastline was once deep inland. If early humans built on those now lost coasts, those structures lie submerged beneath the water. Our species, and the species before us, have always been drawn to the meeting point of land and water. Fresh water gathers at edges. Fish gather at edges. Animals gather at edges. Life congregates along shorelines, and humans follow life. If Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, or even earlier builders placed shelters, fire circles, or temporary settlements on those ancient coasts, we will not find them on land. They are beneath the sea. Modern bathymetric scans reveal underwater riverbeds that once wound through open plains, where now only deep blue water exists. These ancient rivers were carved long before pyramids or temples, long before agriculture or writing. They would have been natural migration corridors. If a group paused along those riverbanks, built huts of wood, made hearths of stone, or shaped tools of bone, every trace except the heaviest objects is gone. Wood collapses underwater, rope decays, bone dissolves, time erases everything except what refuses to yield. Archaeologists have always known that the record is incomplete, yet we forget that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We imagine that if ancient humans built something substantial, we would see it. But nature hides its own history. Sand drifts, sediment falls, water buries, wind erodes, fire consumes, ice grinds. 95% of all ancient human structures were made from materials that do not survive the passage of even a few centuries. The shelters built by Neanderthals along riverbanks, the huts built by Homo erectus near ancient lakes, the lean-to constructions built of mammoth bone and hide in tundra wind, most of them are gone. What remains are the few structures built of stone in places where time could not easily reach. Bruniquel Cave survived because its entrance collapsed. sealing its contents in an airtight shell. Terra Amata survived because soil hardened over its post holes and protected them like scars in sediment. When we study prehistory, we are not seeing the full story. We are seeing only the structures that time allowed to remain. Imagine a coastline 20,000 years ago. The sky glows at sunset, orange light reflecting on rippling water. A family group builds a low shelter using driftwood and woven grasses. They place stones around a hearth to contain heat. They hang fish to smoke and dry. They watch the horizon for storms. The shelter stands only a few weeks before the group moves on. The structure collapses. Rain wears it away. The next season, it disappears. And when the ice melts, the sea rises and swallows the coastline. Everything that once stood on that land rests now beneath water and silt, hundreds of meters from the current shore. We dig in the wrong places. If we could drain the oceans, we would likely find the earliest foundations of shelter. We might discover how Homo erectus arranged their huts on ancient beaches. We might find the pathways Neanderthals carved along river deltas. We might find where Denisovans camped in coastal forests and collected shellfish, while the waves receded. At the bottom of swallowed coasts may lie the first villages. No lost advanced civilization is required. No mythical continent must be imagined. The explanation is far more grounded. Time and climate erased what they built. Nature leaves no record of wood and fibre. Only stone survives. The Earth does not archive history. The Earth recycles it. What we find today are the rare exceptions. Stone rings in deep caves, megastructures carved into bedrock, pillars embedded into hillsides. They endure because they are heavy and the ground held them steady. Everything else returned to dust. When the last ice sheets melted, oceans rose. Floods consumed valleys. Lakes spilled over and widened. Coastal regions disappeared forever. Humanity remembers this in myth. Nearly every culture carries a memory of a great flood. These stories are not fiction. They are the memory of land that vanished beneath waves. Architecture has always been a race against forgetting. There is a moment in human evolution when hands became extensions of thought. The builders at Lamekwi shaped stone when brains were still small. The people of Terra Amata raised shelters against wind when their lineage was still young. Neanderthals constructed rings deep in Brunical Cave when Homo Sapiens had not yet crossed every continent. Denisovans thrived at altitudes that would suffocate most modern humans. Each species carried a fragment of the blueprint that would eventually become architecture. Building is not a trait of one species. It is a trait of humanity as a lineage. Architecture did not begin with walls. It began with foresight. To build is to imagine something that does not exist yet, then shape the world to match the idea. A builder sees potential when no structure exists. They see shelter in driftwood, order in stone, meaning in circles carved into bedrock. The earliest builders did not have language as we know it, but they had imagination. When Homo erectus placed posts in a circle around a hearth, they created space. When Neanderthals arranged broken stalagmites into rings, they created order. When Denisovans lived continuously in a high-altitude cave, they demonstrated endurance as architecture. When hunter-gatherers carved Göbekli Tepe, they created memory made physical. When the people of Nabta Playa aligned stones to the rising of the sun, they anchored time itself. Every one of these actions leads to us. Modern humans did not invent the desire to build. We inherited it. We simply had the benefit of continuity. Our structures lasted because we used stone and fired clay, and because we built in places not drowned by the ocean or ground to dust by ice. If wood endured like limestone, then the history of architecture would begin not with Sumer or Egypt, but with Terra Amata. If the ocean had not risen, the earliest villages would lie exposed at the edge of ancient coasts. If caves did not collapse, we would see entire sequences of Neanderthal constructions. The missing chapters of human ingenuity are not missing. They are drowned, buried, or turned to soil. We believe we are the first because our evidence survived. But the instinct to build did not appear with Homo sapiens. It is older than our species, older than our genus, nearly as old as bipedal walking. The blueprint of architecture lived first in hands that belonged to other humans. Not alien, not mystical, not forgotten advanced civilizations. Humans, our relatives. We are not alone on the evolutionary tree. We are the surviving branch. Other branches built. Other branches shaped stone. Other branches made fire. Other branches imagined. Their structures vanished. We remain. Humanity is not the first builder. We are merely the last builder whose work time allowed the Earth to remember.